It's so interesting. God has never changed. It's so interesting. Left on his own, man hasn't either. And won't. I was dwelling on our country. Again, this week has been for quite a few weeks in a row. And we're in a mess. We cannot blame God. I remember reading in history the early days of our country. The first Supreme Court justice was a very, very God-fearing man. And because they couldn't capture him and find him, the British went through and burnt his parents' house down. And such tender words in a letter he wrote them. And then in 1830, when England was sure that they were going to take America back, and a gospel man wrote our national anthem, Sir Francis Scott Key, went to the President of the United States and got a letter, which was accepted by all countries then, to give him safe passage. And he went to the main English ship, and they had our main surgeon captured. They were going to put him down on the sugar plantations in the islands, and of course that would kill him. Sir Francis Scott Key went on that ship, spoke to the captain for the freedom of the doctor. The captain said, "It will make no difference. We will own America in the morning." Sir Francis Scott Key stood on the bow of that ship all night long praying for this country. In the morning, the flag was still flying, and that's when he wrote our national anthem. We had men in this country in the founding days in lead positions that loved the gospel. But look in 1 Kings chapter 8. And I want to read just a few bits and pieces. Verse 22, Solomon stood before the Lord and he prayed. And so we now have Solomon's prayer. And he says in verse 31, if any man trespass against his neighbor, etc., etc., God, you hear from heaven. Verse 33, when thy people Israel be smitten down before the enemy, because they've sinned against thee, and shall turn again to thee and confess thy name and pray and make supplications unto thee in this house, then you hear, O Father. Verse 35, when heaven is shut up and there be no rain because they've sinned against thee, do we begin to get the point about America today. So our text for today is verse 37 forward. If there be in the land famine, pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, caterpillar, if their enemy besiege them, whatsoever plague or whatsoever sickness there be, remember verse 31, verse 33, verse 35. What prayer and supplication soever may be made by any man, or by all thy people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart. Spread forth his hands toward this house. Hear thou in heaven, thy dwelling place forgive and do. Give to every man according to his ways, whose heart thou knowest. For thou, even thou only, knowest the hearts of all the children of men, that they may fear thee all the days that they live in the land which thou gavest unto our fathers. Your outline. If, verse 37, it does not matter what it is, famine, pestilence, sickness, whatever. Why? Because it is all the judging hand of God. It's all the judging hand of God. He's over all. Point number 2. This one gets a little sticky. Prayer and supplication. Verse 38. By any man. Can be one. Or can be all the people Israel, all the stack of believers. They need to know the plague of their own heart. How vile they are. How undone they are. How undeserving they are. And as by the grace of God they see what a wretch they are. The spreading of the hands was a picture of submission. Because as they would go before a potentate or king or whatever, they would bow their heads. The king had a sword. He could have cut their head off. It was a point of complete, total submission. And that's what he's saying here. Complete, total submission to God who he is in his way. Roman numeral 3. Then God, would you please hear? Oh, how we need to pray, how we need our God to hear. And how this land needs the forgiveness of Almighty God. So many stories of history flitting through my mind even right now, of men in time past who stood. A senator from Kentucky, long time ago, on his horse, to let you know how long ago it was, to the house for the day's work, sees the house of a prominent person burning. This is recorded history, incidentally. Gets in the Senate, and someone stands up and says, so-and-so's house burnt. We need to help them rebuild that. Take some federal funds and rebuild it. He said it is against the Constitution to take federal money to provide for an individual. The individual is to provide for himself. That's in recorded history. We've gone so far away from where our country was. There's no question of what's going on and why there is so much turmoil in our country, so much hate, so much murder, and on we can go. It is the result of our sinning against, as a nation, Almighty God. You and I as believers need to stand. We need to ask God to hear our prayer, to forgive this land, as he says in verse 39, and then do that God would do in keeping with his character for this country, and grant us by his grace to live peaceably before all men. Roman numeral 4 in your outline this morning. All of this is for this purpose, that man will fear you all the days of life. God does not afflict willingly. His affliction is because of sin, and this country needs to hear this kind of a message, and you and I need to be praying for this country. Not only that man will fear all the days of the life, but they will walk in the way of his grace. And there's so little gospel in this country today. Now, Roman numeral 5. If anybody comes for God's namesake and prays, he says, then please hear and do. Again, that this country would learn to fear Almighty God, and that his church is called by his name. We need to stand for the gospel. We need to admit that the problems in America are our problems. This country has sinned grievously against God. And you and I, as believers, need to pray that God be pleased to shine his face on this country. And as Rick read in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people, which are called by my name, shall pray, confess their sin, etc., he says, I will hear and I will heal. That's a challenge for us. Think about it.